Some powerful gains for the Conservatives and some rather disappointing losses for Labour. So with that in mind, and given that we were talking earlier about the by-election in Hartlepool, I'm pleased to say that the former Labour MP for Hartlepool, Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, has joined us. Of course, former Cabinet Minister, former European Commissioner, and a distinguished strategist. Peter, thanks for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Must be very sad for you to see what happened in Hartlepool from Labour's point of view.
It is. I'm very upset. I care very deeply about the town, and I've spent a great deal of time there during the by-election campaign all this week, going from door to door. But although it was a funny old by-election, a strange campaign, two things are absolutely clear to me about it. One is that COVID, the pandemic, almost literally drained the politics out of the by-election and out of the campaign. It was almost impossible to raise any issue, to touch on any subject, to issue any challenge on anything other than what people really wanted to talk about, which was COVID, the pandemic, getting through it, and of course the vaccine, which has offered a huge reprieve for the government. And usually by-elections are occasions where people issue a powerful message or a big protest vote against whatever they think the government is doing wrong. This didn't happen in this by-election. Secondly, it's perfectly clear to me that the Labour Party has basically not been forgiven for losing its way during the last decade. When we came out of government in 2010, the people who took over the leadership of the Labour Party, thought it was incredibly clever to sort of try and airbrush out and then sort of extinguish all the achievements that we had chalked up in government. Things which my constituents in Hartlepool and elsewhere in the country had enthusiastically voted for, giving us 3 successive major victories. And yet here was the Labour Party trying to distance itself from the achievements of its own government. And then we sort of accelerated headlong into the sort of fantasy land of Jeremy Corbyn. And it is amazing, because Jeremy Corbyn has not been leader of the Labour Party for, a year. And yet here I was in Hartlepool, having his name, being bandied around on the doorstep, thrown at me. He casts a long shadow still over the Labour Party. And until we have made it absolutely irrevocably clear that we have changed, that we have moved on, that we are not that sort of Labour Party anymore, I'm not sure whether those absolutely respectable working class voters who were our bedrock for New Labour are going to forgive us and are going to come back to us.
It was interesting earlier, Peter, just talking about the debate, the internal debate in the party, which has obviously reignited today following the result, and we spoke to...
You call it a debate, yeah?
Well, it's an exchange of views.
It's
an exchange of views. A former Labour MP, former colleague of yours, Laura Pidcock, in County Durham, was saying exactly the opposite, which was that the party's message simply wasn't radical enough. It simply wasn't appealing to the working classes. It wasn't a programme that they would be attracted to.
Why did she lose her seat then herself in 2019? She stood on a programme of radical policies, all the things that she believes in and wanted to put forward, and she lost in Durham. Why? If it was so good, if it was so brilliant, if it was so appealing, why did she lose?
I'm making the point, Peter, that this debate is still going on.
Rhetorically.
I mean, this debate is still going on. John McDonnell earlier making the same point.
Yeah.
But it's a point about perceptions. It's a point about perceptions.
That this party cannot learn from its defeats. It can't even learn from its victories. It can't even learn from its victories. We had 4 successive election defeats before Blair was elected in 1997. And then he won again. And then he won again after that. And since then, we've had another 4 election defeats. It's about time we learned both from our defeats and from our victories.
OK, where Sir Keir's concerned and the way that he's being advised, and you will have an important role in that, as will others. On the question of Brexit, which many people feel the party has misjudged, and that Sir Keir hasn't been, clear enough about the party's acceptance of it, has that been a weakness?
Absolutely not an issue raised with me once by a single voter on any doorstep during this entire campaign. Now, but however, let me make the point, because I think people feel Brexit's done. It's delivered. And by the way, an awful lot of Brexit Party voters gave their support to the Conservatives in order to reward Boris Johnson for delivering them their Brexit. And they're entitled to do that, and I completely understand it. But where I think that Brexit is a factor is in this respect. Brexit values the sorts of cultural differences, social differences, the sort of intensity of feeling that it excited, that is still present. It's not about Europe. It's not about self-government. It's not about, relitigating the Brexit decision. But there are now clearly cultural and social divisions which, in a sense, were exposed by Brexit, which do overlay economic and other class interests amongst people in the north of England, and they were very clearly on display in talking to me in my former constituency. So this is something Labour has to understand. The truth is that there has grown over the last decade, again, I make no apology for admitting this, over the last decade, quite a deep cultural disconnect has grown between the Labour Party, first under Ed Miliband and then under Jeremy Corbyn. Between our party and those voters who socially and culturally are not on the same wavelength as us and not on the same page, even though they like many of our policies. They feel that we are trying to stand up for them. We bring the investment in public services. We're trying to bring jobs to areas which have lost industry. We're trying to bring change. But there's something else which is not so economic, which is not about class. It's about social and cultural differences. And the Labour Party has got to understand that and come to terms with that if we are ever going to succeed in getting back onto that wavelength of those bedrock voters in Hartlepool and elsewhere who clearly we've lost.
Peter, bear with us, because there we can see in our big screen, Kirsty's in Edinburgh. She wanted to come in with a question.
Peter, talking about those bedrock voters, 53% of those bedrock voters voted for Labour in Hartlepool in 2017. Today in Hartlepool, we hear, older working class voters who own their homes, maybe even 2 cars, that actually Labour has no song to sing to them. There is nothing to say to them. They believe that the levelling up agenda is going to help them, their children and their grandchildren.
Well, Kirsty, you make a very, very important point, because what I did hear on the doorstep time and again is if we've got a Tory government, we might as well get a Tory MP who can get money into Hartlepool through the Tory Tees Valley mayor. Now, in a sense, this almost was a sort of transaction that voters were entering into. It wasn't that they weren't ever going to vote Labour again, but for now, they were looking at this, frankly, in an almost instrumental way. People said to me, money's gone all over the place. It's gone over anywhere but in Hartlepool. And the reason is that Tory Tees Valley mayor has not sent the money our way. If we get a Tory MP, they can't say no to us again. Well, you can call it a bribe if you like, you can call it pork barrel politics, but actually it's straight basic politics. And I do not criticise my former constituents for voting in that way, because frankly, Hartlepool has taken a real toll in the last 10 years from Tory austerity and public service cuts and spending cuts in the town. And if they feel that they can get a little bit more of it now to offset that, who can blame them for doing so?
Yes, and your former colleague, Laura Pidcock, was talking about cuts to local authority services and then that shift of money, as you say maybe pork barrel politics or whatever. But they see local mayors, they see people at Ben Houchin in their own image doing things that would be unthinkable from a former Tory government, privatising the local airport. Whoever would have done that? And yet he's been given the freedom to do that. So they see localism affecting them in a way that actually Labour hasn't been able to deliver that for them, even in terms of the message.
But Kirsty, the reason we haven't been able to deliver it is because we haven't been in office, we haven't been in power for 10 years. We've lost 4 successive general elections since we came out of office in 2010. Ask yourself why. Why is that the case? Ask the leaders who changed the Labour Party so radically after 2010 and then did so again with Jeremy Corbyn. Ask them why they think we have lost 4 successive general elections. And then ask yourselves why we haven't been in a position to help people like those in my former constituency who have done without and who have paid the price for Labour failure.
Peter, it's very good of you to come in, and thank you for sharing your analysis with us, and we're grateful. Thank you very much indeed. Lord Mandelson there, the former Labour Cabinet Minister. Thanks to him for coming in.